In 2007, Nokia was an invincible empire. A $400 billion market cap. 5 out of every 10 mobile phones sold on Earth were a Nokia. Their market share was larger than Apple, Samsung, and Motorola combined. They didn't just own the market, they were the market. 6 years later, in 2013, the empire's mobile division collapsed. Microsoft bought it for a miserable $7.2 billion, less than what Nokia had spent on R&D that same year. This wasn't a simple business failure. This was the largest corporate suicide in modern history. How? How did the empire that defined modern communication become so blind it couldn't see the future? This wasn't an overnight collapse. It was a slow, deliberate suicide with roots hidden in the company's most successful days. This is the story of the fatal flaw that destroyed the Nokia empire from within. And in this video, we will expose the blueprint of that fall. But here is the real paradox. Nokia saw the future. They had built the iPhone 7 years before the iPhone. They knew exactly what was coming, and that is precisely why they failed. And they didn't know the key to their destruction was in the pocket of a man who was at that very moment waiting for a phone call at Microsoft. To understand the fall, you must first understand the sheer scale of the empire. In the late 90s and early 2000s, Nokia wasn't just a brand, it was part of our cultural identity. Their slogan, "Connecting People," wasn't just marketing, it was reality. They built phones that were built like tanks. The Nokia 3310 became a symbol of indestructibility. You could drop it off a building, and the only thing that would break was the pavement. They made innovation human. The game Snake, polyphonic ringtones, swappable faceplates. Nokia was the first to understand that a phone wasn't a dry business tool. It was a device for personal expression. They had total dominance over Europe, Asia, Africa, and the Middle East. In Finland, Nokia was so large it accounted for 4% of the entire country's GDP. They had an army of the world's best engineers. Their R&D centers were building the future. In fact, Nokia had working prototypes of smartphones with touch screens and high-speed internet 7 years before the first iPhone was announced. So why did they fail? Because inside the shining glass walls of their headquarters, a fatal flaw was growing. That flaw was arrogance, a paralyzing corporate arrogance. Nokia was so successful it no longer believed it could be wrong. They were addicted to their hardware. Their philosophy was, as long as we build the best antenna, the best battery, and the most durable body, customers will always choose us. They failed to understand a critical truth. The future of the phone wasn't in the hardware, it was in the software. And this fatal flaw, this arrogance, was becoming the true antagonist, eating the empire from the inside out. At Nokia, power wasn't held by the innovators, it was held by bureaucratic middle managers. Engineers would bring revolutionary ideas, and the managers would bury them. Why? Because those ideas threatened the sales of their current successful products. The Nokia empire was being held hostage by its own success. And this set the stage for the most catastrophic decision in their history. January 9th, 2007. Steve Jobs walked on stage and said, "Today, Apple is going to reinvent the phone." The world saw the iPhone, a single pane of glass, no buttons, a true computer in your pocket. The world's reaction was wonder. But the reaction in the Nokia boardroom was laughter. This is where the human decision is made. Olli-Pekka Kaas-Vuo, Nokia CEO, dismissed the iPhone as a niche competitor. He said, "It is not a serious threat." They saw the iPhone and listed all its weaknesses. It has a weak battery, it's fragile, the reception is terrible, the camera is weak, and most importantly, Apple has no experience making phones. They were right. The first generation iPhone was a terrible phone. But Nokia decided to ignore the one thing that mattered 1,000 times more: the ecosystem. Jobs wasn't selling a phone. He was selling iTunes and the App Store. He was selling a platform. Nokia's fatal flaw, hardware arrogance, had blinded them. But the real disaster wasn't the arrogant reaction. The disaster was the civil war the iPhone triggered inside Nokia. Suddenly, Nokia's managers realized their old operating system, Symbian, was dead. Symbian was built for pushing buttons, not for touching screens. Imagine the Roman Empire is burning, and instead of putting out the fire, the senators are arguing about the color of the curtains. That was Nokia. Engineers begged the company to gamble on a new modern OS called MeeGo. But the managers, drowning in bureaucracy and afraid of losing their short-term bonuses, descended into infighting. Different teams developed different operating systems, and senior leadership, instead of picking a winner, torpedoed each project so that no single one would threaten the others. They decided to fight themselves instead of the enemy. And that was the beginning of the end. While Nokia was at war with itself, a Trojan horse entered the city. Google gave the Android operating system away for free to all of Nokia's competitors, Samsung, HTC, Motorola. Suddenly, all of Nokia's rivals were armed with Google's ecosystem. Nokia was now alone, trapped between two giants, Apple's closed ecosystem and Android's open one. Arrogance had paralyzed them, and that paralysis created a massive power vacuum. A law of nature. A vacuum always gets filled. In 2007, Nokia had 50% of the market. By 2010, that share had fallen to 28%. By 2012, Nokia's market share was less than 3%. The empire was burning. This wasn't a decline, it was a complete evaporation. This was a brutal market correction. The market was reacting to Nokia's arrogance. Customers didn't care about better hardware, they wanted apps. They wanted a fluid user experience. The vacuum Nokia created wasn't a vacuum for durable phones, it was a vacuum for an ecosystem. And that vacuum was filled by two new forces. Apple, iOS, with its closed, premium, and massively profitable ecosystem. Google, Android, with its open, free ecosystem that quickly devoured the entire mid- and low-end market. In a final act of desperation, Nokia hired a new CEO in 2010, Stephen Elop, a man from Microsoft. This was the man from our hook. In one of the most famous memos in business history, the Burning Platform memo, Elop described the situation. "We are standing on a burning platform. We have to jump." And he jumped, right into the arms of Microsoft. Elop decided to abandon Symbian and MeeGo, Nokia's only chance at independence, and exclusively use Microsoft's dead operating system, Windows Phone. This was the final bullet to the head of the empire. Customers didn't want Windows Phone. App developers didn't want Windows Phone. Nokia was building the world's best hardware, those amazing Lumia cameras, but running an operating system that nobody used. They had become a beautiful racehorse that nobody wanted to bet on. In 2013, the empire fell. Stephen Elop, the man who came from Microsoft, sold Nokia's mobile division to Microsoft for $7.2 billion. Many call it the greatest Trojan horse operation in corporate history. A $400 billion empire destroyed by one fatal flaw, arrogance, and one catastrophic human decision. Nokia's fall isn't a story of failed technology. It's a story of failed culture and arrogance. Nokia had everything: the money, the engineers, the market share, and even the ideas for the future. But they clung so tightly to their current empire that they couldn't build the next one. They forgot that innovation isn't a destination, it's a permanent journey. The moment you think you are king is the moment you lose the throne. And this brings us to today's empire law. Empire law number 3. Arrogance is the tax that success levies on innovation. This is the deepest part of the story. Success gives you resources, but it also imposes arrogance as a tax. That arrogance convinces you that you succeeded because you were smart, not because you were lucky or well-timed. Nokia paid that tax. Their arrogance made them believe that hardware, what they were good at, would remain more important than software, what they were weak at. They forgot the market doesn't care what you're good at. It cares what it needs. This law is still in effect today. Is Google, by clinging to search, paying the arrogance tax against the AI revolution? Is Meta, by forcing the metaverse, ignoring the next real threat? Empires that are unaware of this tax are doomed to repeat Nokia's history. But what do you think? If Nokia had swallowed its pride at that crucial moment and chosen Android, could they have beaten Samsung today? Or was their fatal flaw so deep they would have found a way to fail anyway? Leave your strategic analysis in the comments below. If you want to learn more rules of how great empires are built and destroyed, subscribe and hit the bell to become part of the empire of money. And if you think the fall of Nokia was shocking, wait until you see our next video, where we expose how Google's internal civil war murdered its own gaming empire, Stadia, before it was even born.